Welcome everyone. Today's set of notes is going to be focusing on the difference between a genome, genes, and alleles.
The dot point we're going to be focusing on is pretty straightforward. We just need to make sure that we can distinguish between what a gene is, what an allele is, and what a genome is, so that we can confidently use these terms when we're trying to explain different biological concepts and applying them to our SAC or exam scenarios. So let's take a look at them in a little bit more detail now.
Let's start off with what a genome is. So a genome is defined as the total number of genes within a cell of an organism. Specifically though, we're only looking at a haploid set of chromosomes. So even though we know that our somatic cells, our body cells within an organism, contain 2 copies of every chromosome, to determine the genome of an individual, we only want to look at one set of those chromosomes, or a haploid set of those chromosomes. So for example, in humans, that means that we would be looking at 22 autosomes or regular chromosomes that don't determine our sex, and then the sex chromosome that is within that cell as well. This image here is showing you a breakdown of what makes up a genome of different organisms. So the genome of an organism, just a reminder, is the total sum of the genes within a haploid cell. So if we're looking at humans, for example, in a haploid cell of a human, we would find approximately 21,000 genes. And in that cell, those 21,000 genes would be made up of approximately 3 billion different bases. So that's the A's, T's, G's, and C's that are coded for in our DNA. So 3 billion of those. In comparison, we might look at, for example, a little mouse. They have 30,000 genes within their genome, so their haploid set of chromosomes, and that's made up of 2.6 billion A's, T's, G's, and C's. Another reason that I'm pointing this out is if we're comparing the number of genes that exist within an organism, lots of people think that the more genes that an organism has relates to their intelligence. I think if we just compare human and mouse for an example, we definitely know that the number of genes that an organism has does not relate to the intelligence of that organism. Mice have more genes than humans. They have 30,000. Humans only have 21,000, 30,000 being bigger than 21,000. And I think you would find it very hard to argue that a mouse is more intelligent than the average human being. So the number of genes or the size of the genome does not relate to the intelligence of the organism. Okay, let's have a look at what a gene is. Now, most of you will probably have an idea of what this is, but I guess the definition of a gene is a small section of DNA that is going to encode for a particular characteristic, or you might have it mentioned as a particular protein. And we talk about the role of proteins a little bit more when you get into Year 12 biology. But for Year 11, we're looking at a gene in terms of a section of DNA on a chromosome that is coding for a particular characteristic. For example, your blood type, your eye color, your hair color, lactose intolerance, or the ability to digest lactose, those sorts of things. A reminder that in humans, our genes, we obviously have 2 copies of every gene. And the reason that humans have 2 copies of every gene is that we are inheriting 1 copy from our mum and 1 copy from our dad. So if you look down at this diagram in the bottom here, we're seeing that the father in this diagram is passing on his X chromosomes to his daughters and his Y chromosomes to his sons, and the mother is passing an X onto each of her children as well. And half the DNA from your mum, half the DNA from your dad, that obviously leads you to become who you are today. Another term that you guys should also be familiar with is the word locus or loci. This is just a scientific term that describes or refers to the location of a gene on a particular chromosome. And we will talk more about that when we look at genetic inheritance. An example that we can quickly touch on today is if we look over at the diagram here on the side, we can obviously that we've got a homologous pair of chromosomes. Remember, a homologous pair means that they contain the same genes. And we can see that these 2 chromosomes that I've circled here contain the same genes based on the band pattern that we're seeing. So this is the same gene on this chromosome as it is on this chromosome. You get one copy from your mum, one copy from your dad. Okay? And that gene location for these genes that I've circled here or highlighted here, that would remain consistent for all members of that species. So for example, if we're looking at humans and this was the gene that determined your blood type and it's located on chromosome 3 in this band, it would also be located on chromosome 3 in this band for every human. The final term that we're looking at today is an allele. Okay, allele, lots of people struggle to say it, allele. So an allele is a scientific word that we use to describe different versions of the same gene. So some examples of alleles. Everyone that is a human contains a gene or 2 copies of a gene that determines what your earlobes look like. Okay, so in this diagram here, we're seeing an individual who has unattached earlobes and an individual that has attached earlobes. So they both have the genes for earlobes, but the version of that gene or the alleles that they inherit for that gene will determine whether they're going to have attached earlobes like this individual here or unattached earlobes like this individual here. Another example we might look at is these Drosophila fly down the bottom here. So in this example, we might be looking at the gene for eye color. So all of them are going to contain copies of the gene for eye color, but they're going to have different versions of the eye color gene. So this first fly here contains the alleles or the version for red eyes. This one contains the alleles or the version of the gene for brown eyes. This one has the purple eye alleles, and then so on. We can also look at examples of corn. Okay, so here we have nice smooth corn and really wrinkly corn. Okay, so the texture of corn can be a type of gene or a section of DNA that codes for something, and then we can have different versions or different alleles for the texture of corn. We can have the allele for smooth corn, or we can have alleles for wrinkly corn. We could do the same with corn color. So we've got yellow corn color or purple corn color. Again, it's the one gene for corn color, but that gene has many different versions. For year 11 biology, most of the time we're only looking at genes or traits that have 1 or 2 alleles within them. So for example, that earlobe example has unattached earlobes or attached earlobes. There's no other version or alleles for that particular gene. So just keep that in mind as we're moving forward and look at specific examples of genetic inheritance.